Sicily, late 1943. The afternoon sun burns across a dusty Allied airfield, its heat rippling over rows of captured German equipment. Amidst the wreckage, rusted helmets, twisted weapons, and shattered trucks, one peculiar vehicle stands intact, a boxy, sand-colored Kübelwagen. Its thin metal panels shimmer under the Mediterranean light. A group of American mechanics gathers around it, sleeves rolled, sweat cutting clean lines through the grime on their faces. One sergeant, a wrench in hand, leans close to the open engine compartment. Inside, a tiny, almost toy-like motor hums quietly. 25 horsepower? He mutters, half amused, half baffled. The men chuckle. Compared to the roaring jeeps and trucks of the U.S. Army, this German machine looks like a joke. Yet as one of them turns the ignition, the little engine coughs, then settles into a steady, confident rhythm. The laughter fades. The Kübelwagen purrs like it knows something they don't. And so began the Americans' unexpected fascination with the vehicle that carried the Wehrmacht across half of Europe. Long before the Kübelwagen rumbled across Europe's battlefields, it was born from an idea that had nothing to do with war. In the mid-1930s, Adolf Hitler envisioned a car for the common German, the Volkswagen, or people's car. Affordable, simple, and durable, it would carry families on the newly built autobahns that symbolized the promise of the Third Reich. The man chosen to bring this vision to life was an ambitious engineer, Ferdinand Porsche. But as Europe edged closer to conflict, civilian dreams gave way to military realities. The Volkswagen factory at Wolfsburg shifted its purpose from mass-producing family cars to building machines for conquest. In 1938, under the supervision of the German Army's High Command, Porsche began adapting his Volkswagen prototype into a light military vehicle, a field car that could handle mud, snow, sand, and chaos. The result was the Type 82 Kübelwagen, short for Kübelsitzwagen, meaning bucket seat car. It was not armored, not powerful, and certainly not glamorous, but it was brilliant in its simplicity. Powered by a small 985cc air-cooled engine producing just 25 horsepower, the Kübelwagen weighed barely half as much as an American Jeep. Its flat, reinforced underbody gave it surprising off-road agility, while its rear-mounted engine and lightweight frame kept it nimble on almost any terrain. In September 1939, when German troops rolled into Poland, Kübelwagens followed behind. They carried officers, messengers, and field engineers, weaving through broken villages and muddy fields where heavier vehicles bogged down. By 1940, they were in France. By 1941, crossing the vast expanses of the Soviet Union. Soldiers quickly learned to appreciate the odd little car. It could be fixed with minimal tools, started in freezing temperatures, and consumed almost no fuel. In the deserts of North Africa, under Rommel's Afrika Korps, its performance became legendary. The Kübelwagen didn't overheat, didn't stall in sand, and often kept running when Allied vehicles failed. German soldiers nicknamed it their faithful mule. One veteran later recalled, "You could kick it, drown it, bury it in dust. It would still get you home." By 1943, more than 50,000 Kübelwagens had been built. They were everywhere the German army went. And soon, wherever they fell, Allied troops would find them. The Allies first stumbled upon the Kübelwagen during the North African campaign of 1942-43. After fierce fighting at El Alamein and Tunisia, hundreds of abandoned or captured German vehicles littered the landscape. Amid the burned-out panzers and shattered half-tracks, these small tan cars looked almost comical. But curiosity won out. American and British soldiers began tinkering with the captured vehicles, trying to understand what made them tick. When the Sicily invasion began in July 1943, more Kübelwagens fell into Allied hands, often in running condition. Mechanics noticed something remarkable. While American Jeeps required constant radiator maintenance under the scorching sun, the Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine kept running without complaint. Its featherweight body allowed it to skim over soft terrain where Jeeps sometimes sank. Word spread quickly among the ranks. The funny little German car could take a beating and still move. At that time, the U.S. Army's standard light vehicle was the Willys MB and its Ford-built twin, the GPW, a symbol of American mobility and power. The Jeep had a 60-horsepower water-cooled engine, a sturdy steel chassis, and a top speed of 65 miles per hour. It was rugged, reliable, and mass-produced in the hundreds of thousands. To most soldiers, comparing it to a 25-horsepower German car sounded absurd. Yet to military engineers, the Kübelwagen represented something more intriguing, a different design philosophy. Where the Jeep embodied power through production and muscle, the Kübelwagen embodied efficiency through engineering minimalism. Every part was purpose-built, fewer moving components, no unnecessary weight, and a motor that could run on poor-quality fuel. High Command saw an opportunity. If the Germans could make a small car that crossed deserts on 25 horsepower, what could be learned from it? By late 1943, several Kübelwagens had been shipped to American proving grounds for evaluation, including facilities in North Africa, England, and the United States. The goal was not imitation, but understanding. Reports described the Kübelwagen as surprisingly effective within its limits, and soldiers who drove it found themselves grudgingly impressed. What began as laughter soon turned to respect. There was something humbling about the machine's quiet competence, a reminder that war was not always won by horsepower alone. And so, on a quiet day in late 1943, American mechanics gathered to start the engine of a captured Kübelwagen for the first time. From the first moment American engineers lifted the Kübelwagen's rear engine cover, the differences were unmistakable. Inside sat a small 985cc flat-4 engine, air-cooled and utterly simple. No radiator, no complex cooling system, no vulnerable hoses to burst under fire. Its heart beat with just 25 horsepower, yet its light frame, barely 2,500 pounds, made that modest output enough to move men and supplies across rough ground. In technical terms, the Kübelwagen was almost primitive, yet every decision behind its design was deliberate. Its rear-mounted engine gave it excellent traction on loose soil. The torsion bar suspension, a novelty for the time, absorbed shocks where leaf-spring Jeeps jolted and bounced. Its ground clearance, combined with narrow tires and a flat underbody, allowed it to glide over terrain instead of digging into it. Most impressive of all was its fuel efficiency. It could travel nearly 30 miles on a gallon, double what a Willys Jeep consumed. When American engineers compared data sheets, they saw two philosophies side by side. The Jeep embodied raw capability, faster, stronger, able to tow, carry, and climb steep inclines. The Kübelwagen, in contrast, was optimized for endurance and simplicity, designed for an army that prized reliability over brute strength. In field tests, it lacked power, but it almost never broke down. That mechanical efficiency reflected something deeper in German tactical doctrine. The Wehrmacht built its campaigns on speed and precision, blitzkrieg, lightning war, where every machine needed to move efficiently with limited fuel. The Kübelwagen fit perfectly within that system. Light enough for air transport, easy to maintain, and versatile across climates. German troops didn't rely on endless convoys of spare parts and mechanics. Their vehicles had to survive long stretches of supply isolation, something the Kübelwagen excelled at. To American soldiers, though, the first encounter was less about tactics and more about humor. Many laughed when they first saw it. This small, box-shaped car with its awkward angles and tiny engine. Some nicknamed it the go-kart. But once they drove it, their skepticism began to fade. The steering was light and precise. The clutch engaged smoothly, and when it rolled over sand or mud, it rarely faltered. One mechanic later wrote in a test log, "Feels like it shouldn't move at all. Yet it keeps going," another added, half-jokingly. "Maybe the Germans are onto something here." Their laughter had turned into curiosity, and soon, quiet admiration. When the Kübelwagen was pushed beyond ordinary roads, its genius became even clearer. In mud, its narrow tires cut through rather than sink. On snow, the rear engine provided traction where front-heavy jeeps struggled. And in the desert, the air-cooled motor shrugged off heat that crippled water-cooled engines. German field reports from North Africa, Russia, and Italy told the same story. The Kübelwagen might look fragile, but it simply refused to quit. Its lightweight frame meant that two men could lift one side to free it from a rut. Soldiers often used boards, rope, or even manpower to right a stuck vehicle, a task impossible with heavier Allied trucks. The car's design was so stripped of unnecessary features that fewer things could go wrong. No radiator meant no boiling over. No heavy armor meant no risk of overheating. It was not a car built to impress, but one built to survive. The more American testers witnessed this, the more their perceptions shifted. What had begun as curiosity turned into respect. The Kübelwagen was a lesson in efficiency, proof that engineering elegance wasn't about adding more, but about removing what wasn't needed. It was German logic in mechanical form. Psychologically, the testing of the Kübelwagen also offered a revealing look into how each nation approached war. For the Americans, industrial might was the backbone of victory. Outbuild the enemy, overpower him, and keep moving forward. For the Germans, design precision was their substitute for mass production. They built fewer vehicles, but each was crafted with meticulous care and mechanical thought. As reports circulated through the U.S. Army's testing corps, senior officers began to appreciate the Kübelwagen's deeper value, not as a superior combat vehicle, but as a window into German military thinking. This was how the enemy saw the battlefield, through a lens of function, minimalism, and ruthless practicality. The industrial contrast between nations was stark. American factories poured out Jeeps by the hundreds of thousands, standardized and replaceable. The Germans, constrained by resources and blockades, designed machines that could operate on minimal fuel and maintenance. The Kübelwagen was, in essence, a mechanical reflection of wartime Germany itself. Efficient, disciplined, and short on luxury. By the end of these initial tests, the Americans no longer laughed when they saw one. They studied it, measured it, drove it again. They understood, finally, that power wasn't the only path to performance. But the real revelation would come when the Kübelwagen was pushed to its limits, early 1944. At a dusty U.S. Army proving ground outside Algiers, a group of ordnance engineers gathered to begin a series of structured tests on the captured German Kübelwagen. The men wore khaki coveralls streaked with oil, clipboards in hand, their pencils sharp with skepticism. On the far side of the lot, the tan German car waited, its narrow tires already caked in mud from earlier trials. The testing officer gave the signal. A mechanic climbed into the driver's seat, turned the small ignition key, and the Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine sprang to life with a soft, uneven rumble. No growl, no roar, just a steady pulse. 25 horsepower, one officer muttered under his breath. We'll see how long that lasts. The first phase was acceleration and speed. A Willys Jeep and the Kübelwagen lined up side by side on the gravel track. At the signal, both vehicles leapt forward, the Jeep pulling ahead easily with its higher torque. The Kübelwagen lagged behind but maintained a smooth, steady climb in speed. By the 1,000-foot mark, the Jeep's tires had kicked up a cloud of dust, while the Kübelwagen trailed calmly, engine humming, unbothered. The stopwatch showed the expected result. Slower, yes, but remarkably consistent. Then came the hill climb test, a steep dirt slope scattered with loose stones and deep ruts. Engineers expected the German car to fail here. Too little power, too light, too awkward. But as the driver shifted into low gear, the Kübelwagen began its ascent with surprising ease. The rear engine layout pushed weight onto the drive wheels, granting traction where the Jeep, front-heavy and powerful, began to dig in. Midway up the incline, the Jeep's tires spun uselessly, mud flying. The Kübelwagen, engine buzzing at high RPM, crawled past it and crested the ridge without stalling. The men at the base of the hill fell silent. One officer took off his cap and wiped his forehead. "That's unexpected," he said quietly, almost to himself. Next was the cross-country endurance run. 10 miles of uneven ground, potholes, and soft sand. Both vehicles started together again. Within the first mile, the Jeep bounced violently, its suspension jolting the driver. The Kübelwagen, with its torsion bar suspension, seemed to float over the rough ground. It didn't race, but it endured. When they reached the halfway point, the Jeep's radiator boiled over, steam hissing from under the hood. The Kübelwagen kept going, unfazed by heat or dust. By the time both vehicles returned to the base camp, the little German car looked almost untouched. The oil temperature was stable. The engine ran cool. Fuel consumption? Nearly half that of the Jeep. The ordnance team gathered their data sheets, whispering among themselves. The laughter from earlier that morning had vanished. They had expected a toy. What they found was a machine that refused to quit. Over the next several weeks, the tests continued, from desert heat to damp morning runs in the hills above Bizerte. Engineers tried everything to break the Kübelwagen. Deep mud traps, stream crossings, long idles under the midday sun. It kept performing, its small air-cooled engine buzzing tirelessly. Reports described its exceptional reliability under abnormal conditions. The simplicity of its design made it almost immune to overheating, and its mechanical parts rarely failed. One technician noted that he could strip and reassemble the entire engine in less than 2 hours. Something impossible with a Jeep. The most surprising result came during fuel efficiency trials. When both vehicles were driven the same distance under equal load, the Jeep consumed nearly twice as much fuel. In wartime, that meant everything. A Kübelwagen platoon could travel farther on fewer supplies, a logistical advantage the Americans could not ignore. Soldiers who had first mocked the vehicle now lined up to drive it. They discovered that it handled easily, turned sharply, and could crawl over rough ground with an agility that defied its small engine. A staff sergeant was overheard saying, "It's like it reads the ground before you do." By late spring, the final evaluation reports were complete. The verdict was clear. The Kübelwagen was not faster, not stronger, but it was brilliantly designed for its purpose. Every element was functional, nothing wasted. The Army's summary labeled it a remarkably efficient vehicle of simple design, capable of continuous operation under adverse conditions. When the compiled results reached Washington, analysts highlighted the same conclusion. The Germans had achieved performance through engineering economy, not brute power. Their approach, though different, was undeniably effective. In the end, no one suggested copying the Kübelwagen. America's vast industry didn't need to. But the tests left a lasting impression on every man who had driven it. A quiet recognition that behind its 25-horsepower engine lay a design philosophy worth respecting. By the end of the trials, skepticism had turned into respect, and curiosity into quiet admiration. When the final reports reached the U.S. Army Ordnance Department, the conclusions were concise, but striking. The German Kübelwagen, though modest in power, had proven itself a marvel of mechanical reliability and fuel economy. The American analysts summed it up clearly. Slower than the Jeep, yet impressively dependable, capable of extended operation with minimal maintenance. The findings noted that its air-cooled engine was particularly effective in environments that challenged water-cooled systems. In arid climates like North Africa, the Kübelwagen ran clean while American Jeeps frequently overheated or suffered from radiator leaks. It required less water, less fuel, and fewer spare parts. All critical advantages in long, isolated campaigns. The report described its mechanical design as ingeniously simple, emphasizing that every part had a clear purpose. Even the car's body, made of thin steel panels, was easy to repair or replace. The flat underside and high clearance allowed the Kübelwagen to ride smoothly over obstacles that typically jarred heavier vehicles. Still, despite admiration from engineers, the Army never considered adopting its design philosophy. America's war machine thrived on mass production, standardization, speed, and numbers. The Jeep, though heavier and less efficient, could be built in staggering quantities, with over 600,000 units produced by 1945. The Kübelwagen, in comparison, existed on a scale of tens of thousands, a fine machine, but too refined for mass mobilization. The Kübelwagen's virtues belong to a different kind of army, one fighting with precision, not abundance. In the industrial heart of Detroit, American engineers recognized the genius in its simplicity, yet also understood that it represented a different war economy altogether. The United States could afford inefficiency. Germany could not. In the end, the U.S. Army filed the Kübelwagen's evaluation under captured enemy equipment, not recommended for imitation. But within those dry pages lay an unspoken respect, a quiet acknowledgement that the enemy's engineering had achieved something elegant, even admirable in its restraint. When the war ended in 1945, the Volkswagen factory at Wolfsburg lay in ruins. The assembly lines that once built Kübelwagens and military vehicles stood silent, windows shattered, machinery stripped by retreating German workers. Yet among the wreckage, a few British officers saw potential. They ordered the plant reopened, not to make weapons, but to rebuild a shattered nation's economy. From the Kübelwagen's mechanical DNA, the Volkswagen Beetle was born. It used the same air-cooled rear engine, the same suspension system, the same practical philosophy. Within a decade, that humble design, once created for war, would carry civilians across peacetime roads around the world. What had been a tool of conquest became a symbol of mobility and peace. In the years that followed, the Kübelwagen itself became a collector's curiosity. Allied soldiers who had tested or captured them often spoke of the car with reluctant fondness. Some brought home parts, photographs, or even complete vehicles. A few restored them for personal use, driving the once-feared German machine on quiet American streets. Others donated them to museums, where they still stand today. Odd, boxy relics of a different engineering mindset. Automotive historians would later recognize the Kübelwagen as a cornerstone of modern utility vehicle design. Its lightweight construction, air-cooled simplicity, and efficient use of power influenced post-war models far beyond Germany. The concept of achieving performance through reduction, through making things simpler, not bigger, became a timeless engineering principle. For veterans, though the Kübelwagen's memory was more personal, it reminded them of that strange moment in 1943 when they had laughed at it, doubted it, then watched it climb a hill their Jeeps could not. Many never forgot the lesson it taught, that victory on the battlefield was not just about strength, but about understanding one's tools. Today, preserved examples of the Kübelwagen can still be found in military museums across Europe and North America. Their tan paint faded, their engines still capable of turning over with a few patient cranks. The name Kübelwagen no longer evokes laughter or ridicule. Instead, it represents an enduring truth about design and war alike. But for those who saw it run, the Kübelwagen remained a quiet reminder that simplicity could outsmart strength. In the end, the Kübelwagen stood as more than just a machine. It was a reflection of two opposing worlds. On one side, Germany's mechanical pragmatism, precise, efficient, and rooted in the belief that less could be more. On the other, America's industrial might, vast production lines, raw power, and the conviction that quantity was its own form of quality. Both philosophies built vehicles that helped define the war, yet they told different stories about how nations thought, built, and fought. The Kübelwagen never roared with power, never impressed with speed. Its 25-horsepower engine whispered rather than shouted, but in that whisper lay a quiet intelligence, a faith in function over force, in design that served purpose rather than pride. While American Jeeps symbolized the unstoppable momentum of Allied industry, the Kübelwagen embodied the engineer's art of doing more with less. History rarely celebrates restraint. The loudest engines and the biggest machines tend to claim the spotlight. Yet, as time passes, the Kübelwagen's legacy endures not for its victories, but for the lesson it carried, that reliability, simplicity, and understanding of purpose can achieve what raw strength sometimes cannot. It began as an object of mockery, tested under skeptical eyes. It ended as a respected artifact,